will rock you. Have we been to this party before? Ha! Into the fast version this time. Next on Crown Jewels. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to PLD Projects. I'm your host, PLD. This is Crown Jewels, where I take you on a journey through Queen's catalog, Queen, the solo ventures, everything else. So we get through every single song, every single version of every single song. And let's find out which version of every song is the best or crown jewel version so we can create our ultimate playlists. And of course, see if it slides into my top 10 Queen related tracks of all time. This week, we'll rock you the fast version. Now, playlists. What am I talking about? I realize I haven't talked about the ultimate playlist in a while. I'm just kind of threw it out there every week. What we're doing, if you look in the show notes, you'll see a Google Doc, a Google Sheets for the Crown Jewel podcast supplemental. In that, you're going to find a lot of information, including all the tracks, all the different playlists, all the different top tens, everything you possibly want is going to be in this document, including the old links to all the old songs that I used to throw out there in other podcasts before I switch over to the each track having its own little Google sheet full of links. I'll probably go back and fill in the blanks, well, the ones I'd done previously when I have time. Of course, that is the key component there, time. But what playlists am I talking about? I'm talking about 13 different playlists. That's right, 13 slowly developing playlists. For each one, I'm going to have a Queen playlist, a Brian May playlist, a Freddie Mercury playlist, and a Roger Taylor playlist. I'm not throwing John under the bus. I'm not discounting John. I'm not, saying John's not worthy. He just doesn't have enough solo material to have his own playlist. He really has a couple acetates and he has a couple of tracks here and there. It's not like you're not going to create a whole playlist out of that. The rest of them, they do. And each version is going to have 3 playlists at least. Queen is going to have 4. The 3 playlists that everyone's going to have, I call them the light versions, the main version, and the expanded version. The light version will be the Spotify playlist. I put that in the show notes as well. I'm sharing my own Spotify playlist as I keep building this up. This is for the real casual. You're going to find all these tracks on Spotify. No matter what they are, these are the tracks you can find on Spotify. There are tracks that are crown jewels that you won't be able to find on Spotify. So when I have to, I'll go to like the second best or third best to kind of at least, I don't want to not have them in there. But if they can't be found on Spotify, I have to make an alternate. I'll note that in the track section of the doc, by the way. Next up, everything will have a main list. Now, this is the main list I'm going to use for myself. This is mostly just going to be Queen. Now, if a live version by Brian and Roger, I think of 10-Minute Funster off the top of my head, live in 2021. That actually was my favorite version. Well, I'm going to use that as the favorite version, but generally speaking, it's going to be a Queen version and only going to be officially released tracks. I basically want this to be the good sounding mix because some of the bootleg versions they have are not great quality, kind of sometimes mess with you when you're sitting down listening to a playlist going from the very high quality to the low quality, kind of messes with you a little bit. So I decided to make the main list just the officially released Queen tracks and solo tracks. But this does include some that aren't readily available anymore, which means I have to upload my own personal versions or my old versions to YouTube Music, which is why I actually still use YouTube Music because I can upload all these old out of print Queen live versions, demos, and things that aren't officially in print anymore, or definitely not on streaming channels. This is still a more casual list overall because of that. It's also the one that's easiest to listen to as far as the most complete list. That is the most proper list. That is all high quality. Next up, I have the expanded version for all the Queen, Brian, Roger, Freddie. And this is the expanded list. Will have even more tracks, the unreleased stuff that never was released, stuff that might not be in the greatest of sound quality, but I kind of want to hear it at some point or another. Doesn't mean they're all bad quality, but some of them are just not ever been released to the public, so they don't really count as part of a main discography. This is going to be a deep dive, including a lot more of the unreleased tracks. Finally, that is all of them now. You're missing the one more playlist. This one I call the Queen Crown Jewels Complete Playlist. At the end of the day, I'm going to take the Queen, Brian, Freddie, Roger, and put them all their complete playlists, all their expanded playlists, I should say, into one big, giant Queen Crown Jewels playlist. Those are all on YouTube. But you can find these lists. I'm keeping them in a Google Doc, so in case you want to make your own YouTube version, seek out some of these versions on your own, download them from YouTube, etc. You can do that. You can do that. So long explanation there. It's been a long time coming because I haven't talked about it in a lot. But let's get to this week's version, or this week's song rather. This is We Will Rock You, the quote unquote fast version. Now, I definitely, when I did We'll Rock You originally, the album version, I kind of could have thrown this in there as a different alternate version, but it's so different and has so many of its own versions that it just made sense to make this kind of a bonus track instead. Because quite frankly, I like both versions. I might as well have the original version and have this version on there as an additional bonus track. So even if this is almost like a sub track, there's still 10 versions to listen to figure out which one will be the crown jewel of the fast version. Before I get into breaking those down, I'll give you a little bit of, you can only give you notes because we don't have any quotes about the specific version, at least that I found readily. Fast version was written by Brian May, still same writer. Features Freddie on lead and backing vocals, Brian on guitar and backing vocals, John on bass, Roger on drums and backing vocals. And right there, that tells you exactly what this is. I'm going to say it here. They call it the fast version. That's the official title. That's in all the live albums. They always call it the fast version. I call it, my personal self, I think of it as this is more We'll Rock You, the full band version. Is it faster? Sure. I guess it's a little faster, especially some of the live versions. They really get up tempo. But really, it's more about being a full band version instead of just Freddie singing lead and Brian Rogers singing backing vocals and there being some stomps and claps and then the one guitar solo. We have Brian playing guitar throughout. We have John picking up the bass, Roger playing some drum fills and everything else. And hell, when we get to the live versions, you get to hear some keyboards in there as well. So it's a full band version. That's the way I look at it. That's the best way to look at it. Now, this was recorded at the BBC. The fast version was recorded at the BBC. In fact, they recorded both the slow version of We'll Rock You, a bit of it, and then they went into this fast version. So that's the only studio type version we have. So we'll lead with that. And then they played it in concert quite often, right from the get-go, November of 1977, all the way through November 3rd of 1982. That's when they retired the fast version. In fact, many times they would often open the show with the fast version or be like one of the first couple of tracks, even if it's not the very first track, and then close with the regular version going into We Are the Champions. This was that way for the longest time. Brian did bring this into his own set list. He would do it quite like the BBC version. He would start with the slow version and then break into the fast version, like both, not quite the full version of either, a little medley of the two. So that was pretty cool. But as far as Queen goes, Queen and Paul Rodgers never did it. But Queen and Adam Lambert did do it quite a bit. A lot of times Queen and Adam Lambert were tossed back to some of the 70s set lists. So it made quite a bit of sense to do it there. So we do have that version. As far as the ones we're going to be listening to, again, we have 10 versions to listen to. We have the BBC session, which we'll listen to first. And then we have the Queen era, which we'll all listen to all at once because they all kind of blend in. I'm not going to lie, but because they have a lot of the similarities to it. It's got the Live Killers version, live in Houston 1977, live at the Budokan in 1979, Queen Rock Montreal from Montreal 1981, On Fire at the Bowl from Milton Keynes in 1982, live in Tokyo from 1982, and then we got the two versions that Brian did that were officially released, live at the Brixton Academy in 1993, and then live at the Palace in in Los Angeles, also from 1993. And finally, it wasn't really technically officially released, but Queen and Adam Lambert's very first concert live at Kiev was broadcast live, so we have a live version of that, which is pretty close to officially released. It was not any of the official live release albums that Queen and Adam Lambert did, but we do get a very good idea of what it was like. All right, let's get into the listening and breaking down. How are we going to do that? Well, I don't want copyright strikes. So what we're going to do in the show notes, I've mentioned this before, I have, in addition to the Google Sheets of the Supplemental podcast, Supplemental for the podcast, rather, I also have a Google Doc which will open up and give you all the links to YouTube versions of the different versions we're going to listen to. So I will have you pause this podcast, click on one of those links, and then come back to the podcast when you're done, and then we can talk about it and break it down. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to. If you just want to hear me ramble, you can go straight through. But I like to try to make it interactive as I can. Either way, you'll have the links for either before, after, or during the podcast if you'd like. So let's get into the first version that we're going to listen to, which is the main version, the BBC session number 6 studio version. Click on that link, come back, and we shall talk about it. And there you have it, the quote-unquote fast version. Again, this specifically, I definitely would call it more of a full band version because it's not much faster, really. It's just a full band, more of a riff and rama from Brian, of course. I love right away. The drums are killer. Right away, we're launching right into it. We are not stopping and clapping. This is a full band rock out version. Roger, there's a lot of fills, goes off a lot. Definitely even seems like a live version. I mean, quite frankly, when they did record stuff for the BBC, it was called Live at the BBC. It is a live in the studio kind of track. So live without a concert crowd, basically speaking. Now the tempo will go up a little bit as we go more into an actual concert moment. I don't know if that's partially adrenaline or if that's just Roger deciding to kick it up a notch to start the concert with. It's a very crisp recording, Definitely hear everything specifically. I love the bass interlude there right before the jamming guitar solo. And then they get into the guitar solo, which Brian rocks, of course. It's very interesting to note the backing vocals aren't as blended as usual. Again, it's supposed to be a live version, so it's not going to be as much. Although we do know that from previous podcast episodes, I've told you that a lot of times they would use official backing tracks, regular backing tracks, or at least well-rehearsed recorded backing tracks that were like the studio. In this case, there is no such backing track. This has got to be pretty much live as they go. So you can actually pick out Roger's voice, pick out Brian's voice individually, but that works for the rawness of it, really. It works for the rawness of what you're going for, not only on this track, but the whole album. The whole album as a whole seemed to be a return to their raw rock roots, getting out of the overproduction as you were. It's still well produced. Let's not try to say this is a very punkish album, but for Queen, it was a punkish album. I do love the nice drumming breaking down at the end. Again, this is barely Roger gets to, it's almost like Roger is making up for lost time. He wasn't in We'll Rock You. I will be all over this version. But a very cool version, very fun version. One note, if you listen to the whole BBC album, this goes from like they said, it starts with the slow version and then just kind of break in there in the middle section there where Roger, it sounded like Roger was reading out a poem, but it's not really Roger at all. What it is from the BBC studio. There was a reading of Herman Hesse's novel, Siddhartha. Herman Hesse, a famous author. It was used in a BBC radio documentary. It was found on the BBC tapes being reused to record the session for for the band, and the band liked the sound of it, so they kind of just retained it. So all of a sudden, there's this random burst from Herman Hesse's Siddhartha in the middle of between the slow version and before they rock on to the ending session. Just interesting note for sure. All right, let's move on then to the rest of the versions. The first one we're listening to is the Freddie era. So I'm going to list out the 6 Freddie versions that we have to listen to. You can choose to listen to 1, 2, 3, 6, none if you want. But I'm going to talk about all the different Freddie era versions. Basically, because we don't need to stop listening to each one individually because they are all from the same, like 77 to 82. It's not like they did anything radically different. It's just kind of different performances. Your miles may vary on those different performances, but those are just to make clear. We got the Live Killers version, the Live in Houston, 1977, Live at the Budokan, 1979, Queen Rock Montreal from 1981, On Fire at the Bull from 1982, the Milton Keynes, and finally Live in Tokyo in 1982. So we're going to listen to those now and come back and we shall talk about the Freddie era. All right, first up, we got the Live Killers version. Now, listen to the podcast before you know I go to queenlive.ca all the time to look at the Live Killers analysis because this is not just made up of one concert or even one tour. This is it is the Live Killers tour, yes, but each track actually can be spliced up into different sections from different concerts. They actually would Frankenstein different concert versions into one track to find the best version, kind of like what we're doing, but in a, I don't know, can be a shittier way. I prefer give me one full concert, or at least just give me a track from a concert instead of trying to hodgepodge things together. They did an analysis over there. My friend Bob Wegner does a great analysis over there, listening to all the unreleased versions that have leaked bootleg versions, trying to compare what sections came from what concert. Unfortunately, I don't get much from the fast version of We'll Rock You. In fact, we get 6 seconds. 1 minute and 16 seconds to 1 minute and 22 seconds is from Lion, February 17th, 1979, that they've determined. The rest appears to be from unknown sources, unknown gigs. They have it separated into 0 to 116 and 122 to 155 and 155 to 248, but all of them are from an unknown concert. So who knows? But at this point, it often opened the gig and was at a fast pace. We do have that interesting kind of like sound being that like from the original tapes before it breaks in, which is a great atmospheric setter. I gotta say, this one works because of that atmospheric setter. It really gets into that rock and roll version. Unfortunately, the Live Killers mix has literally always been a bane of my existence. It's just not a well mixed album. Hell, as I even mentioned before, Roger Taylor specifically has come out and basically decried the entire album. The band hasn't re-released it. Let's put it that way. That shows you how high up it is on their in their esteem. And all the reissues they've done, they've reissued Wembley several times. They've issued a bunch of things several times. We've never gotten, even when they released all the albums, they did not re-release with Live Killer. They've been languishing pretty much out of print almost. There's rumors that they're going to make a Live Killer box set, which would actually fix a lot of this issues, because they would take actual, instead of almost like a remake Live Killers, take the some of the best versions from the different tour and just put them together instead of like trying to Frankenstein these mixes, which I prefer. I don't care if this ever comes back into play. If we get something like that, that'll supersede this album easily as far as I'm concerned. But back to this particular version. This is the first version we're hearing live. Obviously, without the studio, we have less Brian. Brian can overdub himself, so it's a little more sparse. But you'd barely really realize that except for the specific guitar solo moment, because Brian has always played large and in charge. But Roger and John play even louder and even more raucous, I believe, during the jamming sessions, which make the sparser guitar almost unnoticeable. Specifically, you hear it more specifically during the solo section, but otherwise, it feels pretty similar. It's a great ending live, and you get to hear Freddie being playful. That's the different thing about Freddie being live in front of an audience. You get more playful Freddie, which is always fun. But yeah, that's the Live Killer version. Next up, live in Houston, 1977. This is before the Live Killers version, so it's not quite as developed. This was released and the Greatest Video Hits 1 DVD at the time. It's a great live performance. Again, it's part of the Houston 1977 concert I talked about before recently, where a lot of the live tracks from News of the World come from that concert. Threatened to be released. I say threatened to be released at some point. I know it was played at a concert, or rather played at a convention I was at, so I got to see the full as best version as they had. This hasn't really gone through the real process of mixing. I don't believe that they would go. The mix does feel a little raw. I feel like there'd be a lot more equalizing throughout. Some extra guitar noises in there, which is great. The sound isn't balanced very well, though. I got to say, the backing vocals sometimes are a little too high. Other times it's the leading vocals. Sometimes the bass itself is a little too high. It's kind of like, it doesn't really have a consistent sound for me. So, but it's still kind of a good performance. Still trying to find their way through, but so it's not bad. It's not quite solidified yet. Next up, we got live at the Budokan Theater in 1979, the Nippon Budokan. Absolute Greatest was basically instead of having Greatest Hits 1, 2, and 3, they made a compilation, which was the Absolute Greatest, the compilation of compilations. And during that release, they had some streaming video bonus tracks, and this was one of them. In Japan in 1979. This is very similar to the version that's on Live Killers, the same era, obviously. I will say, though, this version, Freddie sounds a little tired here, a little bit more. He doesn't really go for it. A lot of times he's saving his vocal words. I'm not sure if this was a gig that he was tired at or just wasn't quite ready to open the show. It's not bad at all. It just doesn't seem like he's really going for anything. He kind of like plays it safe a lot of the song, speaks a little bit here and there, sings a little bit here. I will say Brian's guitar is a little more aggressive to make up for it, so it's still a good version. But if you're looking for a Freddie version, I would say this is not one of the ones you would gravitate towards when you have the different versions, all the different versions to listen to check for. Not awful, but it's not my favorite. Moving on to the next versions we have the officially released, obviously, from Montreal, one of my favorite concerts of all time. I just did get to see it. It was re-released in IMAX. I was one of the few lucky, proud IMAX viewers. In fact, it actually did very well. I believe it actually, from what I gather, it was only supposed to play for one weekend, but it was so successful, and the biggest like IMAX concert opening of all time, like an archive concert. They actually played a second weekend, so I got to see it, and it was great to see Freddie and I on the IMAX screen. You could see the whole band on the IMAX screen. Got to see my favorite Somebody to Love version of all time. One of my favorite, probably my favorite Queen song of all time. Right now, it's sitting at number one. Who knows by the time we get through this podcast whether that will still be the case. But it was a great concert to see. This version from Rock Montreal, the tempo by now is really upbeat. You kind of see how it develops. It kind of was so slower. Now it's really kind of fast. They're really trying to get you going. Rodder's pumping up. The guitar work is great. The sound, of course, has always been crystal clear on this concert. One of my favorite concerts of all time. In fact, talk about the crown jewel of officially released concert albums. I think this is my favorite. Greatest set, greatest sound. My only negative side is that the audience is a little quieter in terms of down in the mix, but otherwise, this is a great concert experience if you ever want to just buy one live Queen album, Queen Rock Montreal 1981. Roger's really rocking the hell out of this one. Of course, Freddie's also very playful. That is playful at this time, even more so with the audience back and forth. A lot of different, like, we will rock you as they go into the bass interlude. Go for it, Freddie telling Brian for go for it, the solo. Rock yeah, they got a lot of different playful moments in there from Freddie and Roger doing the backing vocals as well. And the band feels really tight at this point. So this is a very fast, fun version of this song. All right, moving on to the On Fire at the Bowl in Montreal in Milton Keynes, 1982, which is another great concert. Especially if we haven't gotten to the hot space era yet. One of the most, shall we say, polarizing albums. It's very maligned by a lot of Queen fans because of their supposedly being the disco album. It is a venture into the dancier side of things. But a lot of people will tell you, and we'll get there. I'll go into a little bit more detail. But a lot of fans for the band prefer all the versions that were on the On Fire at the Bowl concert because live they sound a lot more like Queen, a lot more rocking versions of the songs that were dancey, so to speak, from Hot Space. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about We'll Rock You Fast here. The big difference is, well, in 1982, they actually included a keyboardist. At this point, they had a bunch before settling on Spike Edney. They would have a keyboardist play. They had Morgan Fisher play. They had Fred Mandel play before they settled on Spike Edney. However, I don't really hear the keyboards much in this particular version. The crowd's really into it. You can probably hear the crowd more in this one than anything else. The other bad thing, if you will, about this concert is that Roger uses more of the synthier drums at times. The drum sound isn't the best. I don't really love the drum sound in this one, but the bass sounds great. John's bass sounds phenomenal in this version, I think. But the sound quality overall, not quite as crisp as Montreal. It's a fine version. I prefer Freddie in Montreal, potentially, but this is definitely a nice, fun way to open the gig. And finally, the last one we're going to talk about from the Freddie era is Live in Tokyo, Fest 1982. This was released on the 2011 News of the World Deluxe Edition, also released on the News of the World 40th Anniversary Edition. This was that same Hot Space tour, this time in Japan, and this version comes from the performance at Seibu Lions Stadium in Tokyo from November of that year. This makes this much better than the On Fire at the Bowl, as far as I'm concerned. I actually get to hear a little bit of that piano mix in the background here, especially with the rock and jam out section and the guitar solo. You can hear the piano. It's a nice addition to what's going on for the rest of the song. I'm not a huge fan of the drum sound here necessarily, but Roger playing is very good, and doesn't be too distracting. I feel like it's easier, more covered up with some of the rocking sounds, and the mix is definitely better on it than the On Fire at the Bowl. So this was a definitely welcome experience. This concert they kind of have not released this concert. They've released pieces of this concert over the course of time. And there was some bootleg releases. I think I had this on VHS back in the day. This was a good, fun performance for sure. Freddie was at the top of his game during this show. The band was really at the top of its game by the time they reached Japan on the Hot Space tour. So this is a very solid version. So. All right, let's move on now. We're going to listen to the Brian versions. There are two Brian versions from the Live at the Brixton Academy, which is the live album the Brian May Band released in 1994, concert from 1993, and then Live at the Palace in Los Angeles, which was recently released on the Starfleet box set version, or a bigger expanded version of Starfleet that they released. The tracks with Brian and Eddie Van Halen and everything else, for whatever reason, they put on We'll Rock You on there. I know that part of it was because Let Me Out from that Starfleet Sessions was played at the Palace. They wanted to put that on as a bonus track. We'll Rock You kind of goes right into it. So I don't know if they figured what the hell. I don't know, but hey, you know what? Gives me more Queen content, then I'm all for it. So let's go listen to either one there. Got the Brixton one, the Palace one, or both if you want. Come back, we'll talk about Brian's version of We'll Rock You, the fast version, as soon as we get back. All right, there we go. That's the Brian May live version from the Brixton Academy and from Live at the Palace in Los Angeles. Brixton Academy is the one true live album released by the Brian May Band from that tour. Has not been reissued yet. Brian May is in the midst of a reissuing program. We've seen Back to the Light, Another World, and Starfleet Project get expanded reissues. The rumor is that the Brixton Academy is the next one to be undergoing that process. It would make sense because there's not a whole hell of a lot left on Brian's solo plate that could be reissued. We have the Furious soundtrack, bunch of singles, unless we're going to break into the Carrie Ellis era, which I don't think that will count. But it has been mentioned before that Brixton Academy should get a reissue. It has definitely been some work done on it. We've seen a couple of videos released on his YouTube channel. I really like the Brixton Academy album. I think it's a fun one, and I'm hoping that if we do get a box set, maybe they'll throw on the Royal Albert Hall gig from 1998, which is the Another World tour. It was recorded for release, but Brian was not happy with it. I don't know, maybe with newer technology, he can rescue some of the sound. I'm not sure if it was just his performance. A lot of rumors about why it didn't get released. So, I mean, I doubt it, but it will be such a great bonus for the rest of us out here to get that gig, a professional live recording of the Another World tour. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about We'll Rock You. Brian does it much like the BBC version. We have the slow version at first, and he medleys into the fast version. Something that Queen really couldn't do, because Queen you want to have the full version of We'll Rock You. It's one of their biggest hits. We'll Rock You into We the Champion. So having the fast version in there kind of throws that out of whack. But Brian can certainly do it on his tour, because he generally doesn't do We're the Champions. He's done it once a few times. But mostly it's We'll Rock You. So he gets to do the slow version into the fast version. However, the main issue with that is we only get a slightly edited version. We only get the 2 verses and then they end it. So it's hard to put this as a crown jewel version of the fast version, because it's not the full song. You know how I feel about that. Maybe your miles vary. Who knows? It is very interesting, though. It does have 2 guitars in it, because Brian had a touring guitar as Jimmy Moses during this tour. So automatically it sounds more full than the other live versions. Brian's able to go off and do his solo stuff, also having Jimmy Moses provide the rhythm track as well. Have a few more backing vocalists. We have 2 female backing vocalists in addition to the regular band backing vocalists. So that's different. Brian's voice, I gotta say, it's not bad here. It's not bad at all. Not that I ever think Brian's voice is bad, but Brian, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I tend to like Brian's voice more on as far as lead voice goes, I should say, on the slower, more folksier songs like 39, Sail Away, Sweet Sister, You'll Hear, Long Away, that kind of stuff. That's where his voice really tends to shine. He is not really a hard rocking lead vocalist. In my opinion, I like his backing vocals just fine under the hard rock and stuff, but really Freddie and sometimes Roger, I feel work better as the rock and roll lead singer. But Brian does his tour very well and is all hinging on his voice. And he does a very solid job here. So the Brixton version is fine. I do like the Live at the Palace mix a little bit better. Feels a little more crisper. So if I had to choose one over the other, I'd probably choose the Palace version. And maybe that only might be because it's newer or newer is not the right word, I guess, because I've heard this version before as well. The newer mix I hadn't heard. But I listened to Brixton Academy. I listened to that album out. I really wore that album out. So definitely LA is kind of an alternate version for me. So it's a little more pleasing to the ear, because I'm kind of like, oh, it's kind of a newer version. I set up a little bit more and listen to it. But really, they're similar. If you get one, you get both. There's not a whole lot different for them. But Brian does a good job. Brian definitely does a good job with it. So, all right. Let's listen to one more version, the Queen and Adam Lambert version. Not really an officially live released version per se, but this was broadcast well, so we got a good copy of it for sure. Let's listen to that one live in Kiev in 2012, and then come back and we will talk about it. We will rock you! All right, there you have it, the Queen and Adam Lambert version. I will say I wouldn't judge the band too much on this particular performance. this particular version of the song. This is the first full gig the band did play together. They played in front of 300,000 people in Kiev. Good shining way to start for Adam. I mean, it's got to be shocking to try to step into Freddie Mercury's ballet slippers, as it were, and that's your first gig. I mean, they did, yes, they performed at American Idol a brief time with Chris Allen as part of the show. They did have one other appearance in Belfast, and the MTV EMA Awards. They did a quick kind of medley there to their honoring Queen there. But this was the first time the band actually put forth a Queen concert with Adam Lambert at the helm. And it shows a little bit. I'm not going to lie. They definitely, over time, just definitely got better, and the band fully got tighter. Band really hadn't been performing for a couple of years. They'd taken a few years off after the Paul Rogers era, and the band's getting older at this point anyway. So definitely a learning experience here, and you'll find the band's a bit slower at this point tempo wise. I'm not sure if it's the band really haven't worked themselves back up into shape, into touring shape at this point. Adam's definitely hesitant. He kind of misses his first cue here. He kind of goes off a little bit later. That's not that big of a deal, really, at this point. I will say it doesn't ever get completely better in terms of, I've always said this when the Adam Lambert stuff comes up. He's very vitriolic. Some of the fan base is very vitriolic over Queen is Freddie and no one else. Or Queen and Paul Rogers is better than Queen Adam Lambert. A lot of people have not liked Adam Lambert because of his background. He came from American Idol. He's not a songwriter per se. I mean, yes, he has some credits, I know. But he's not like the musician songwriter that the band really deals with. So it's kind of like it's an old school versus new school kind of thing. But I am not that way. I appreciate what Adam does. I do think that Adam allowed the band to really get far more of the catalog out there than Paul did, because Adam does have the campy side of him. He can pull off something like a Killer Queen, where Paul Rogers doing Killer Queen would have been very strange. But either way, my one criticism, or one of my criticisms of the Adam Lambert era, though, is that Adam definitely works much better on the poppier stuff and the ballad stuff. Ballad stuff is where he really shines, because he's got the pipes. No doubt he's got some great voice. The pop stuff he handles. It's the really harder rock songs, which I think tend to falter. He sounds a little too Broadway, too showy on them, which is why Freddie is who he is. He could do both the ballads, the pop, and he could also rock out and sound dangerous and rock and roll. This particular version, basically does not, well, it proves my point to me. It sounds a little bit showier than it should be. It's not bad at all. It is the full version, at least. The band is starting to get a little bit together at this point. But overall, well, it's not the greatest version, but it's not a bad version at all. All right, let's move on. Let's rank the Crown Jewel version. Let's rate the song, and then we'll move on and talk about next week. All right, let's rank these bad boys again. We have 10 versions to rank. Let's go from the bottom of the list to the top of the list. In last place, the last two slots, this is where I'm going to slot the Brian versions. I do almost like them better than the Adam Lambert version, to be completely honest, but it's the edited down version. It's a medley, so it's not a full version. So when it comes to looking at what's the crown jewel, what's the best version of the track, I want a full version. So at least the Queen and Adam Lambert version is a full version. Brian, unfortunately, gets relegated to the end because of the editing down the medley version of it. I like Brian's performance very well. I like having that extra guitar in there. It definitely rocks out, probably better than some of the other versions, to be completely honest with you. If they'd done a full version, definitely would have seen them higher on the list. But unfortunately, in this case, they're down to the bottom. And then I will put Brixton at the bottom, and I like the Palace version a little bit better. But really, honestly, if you went the other way, that I couldn't argue that either. So next up from that, this is where I put the Queen and Adam Lambert version. Again, not my favorite version at all. It's definitely the band kind of starting to find themselves as a touring outfit. Adam's definitely hesitated overall. I definitely prefer any of the Freddie versions over this for sure, but not awful. All right, so this is where the more important stuff comes in. It's the Freddie live era version and the BBC session, which are all marked together. Let's do it. Live in Houston, 1977 is where I go next. Again, partially the mix. It's not exactly really professionally mixed down as well as the other ones. I don't think even the Live Killers version, at least the Live Killers, have a consistent sound. Houston doesn't really have a consistent sound. So I'm going to put that down here. Next up from there, that's where I'm going to put Budokan. And that's only because Freddie's voice. I feel like Freddie's sounds a little tired here. I think it's mixed better than Houston. This at least that song in Houston, but Freddie's voice sounding kind of tired, kind of drags it down for me. I'd much rather listen to a more excited, more energetic, more Freddie on top of his game. From there on, we have the Live Killers version. I think there's no surprise there. Again, very rare. We'll get a Live Killers version of a Crown Jewel, mainly because of the mix and because of the Frankensteining. It's right in the middle of the pack here for me. At least it does have a more consistent mix than Houston, and it's definitely a better sounding Freddie than Budokan. So the top four now. This is where the top four come in. Next up from here, On Fire at the Bowl. It's nothing against this version. I guess compared to the ones we have to come, they're just better. Just better sounding overall. Again, I don't like the drum sound here quickly. So without that drum sound, I'd need to have something else in place to bump it up the list, and I don't have it. So this is where On Fire at the Bowl is. This is where the next stop is where I'm going to slide the BBC session. This is it. So therefore, the live version definitely outstrips this BBC session version for me. However, BBC Session does take out a lot of live versions as well because it is a very raw sounding rocking thing. It's a crisp recording. Freddie sounds great. It's just the band is almost like starting to learn it. It's like they're just like putting down something on recording that they're gonna perfect much more later on, and they do. They really perfect it farther on into their career into the 80s because the top two choices are both from the 1980s. Rock Montreal is next. That means that my number one and favorite version and crown jewel version for me is the Live in Tokyo 1982, which surprises me. When I went through this, I almost assumed that Rock Montreal would probably be the winner because I love that concert so much, and it's such a great version. And Tokyo 1982 does have those drums that aren't the greatest sounding drums comparatively. However, I don't know what it is, but the full band version, the add in the keyboard, Freddie is playful as all hell. This version does just be a snippet ahead for me for Rock Montreal. So that is our crown jewel, Live in Tokyo, 1982. All right, now it's time to rate the song. And does it slide into my top 10 of all time of Queen related tracks? So far, again, the number 10 is a 10.5. So every song in the top 10 is a 10.5 out of 11 because we always turn things up to 11 here on PLD Projects. And sorry to say, We'll Rock You, the fast version, will definitely not break into that top 10. It's a great version, great song. Out of 11, I'll give it an 8.5. An 8.5 sounds about right. I do give the original version a 9, and that's partially mainly because of the iconic version of the track. That's the more iconic one you hear all the time. It kind of brings everyone together. Having the starkness of the stomp and claps works for that purpose. I mean, overall, there are times when I prefer to listen to the fast version because it's a lot of fun to rock out to. But it's also a more typical song to a degree. So I think the starkness, the sparseness of the original is a little more creative, even though there's less to it. So yeah, they're similar. They're pretty similar. Your miles really may vary, but I'll give it an 8.5. I think that makes the most sense to me. But what about you? What do you think? Do you like this version better than the slow version? And which version do you like better here? That's the big one we want to know. But that will do it for this week. We'll Rock You Fast version. The episode ends here. Well, almost. Got a little bit of housekeeping to do. Next week, we will be going on to a demo from the News of the World album. We have a couple of episodes on the podcast remaining before we jump to the jazz album. We do have 2 demo tracks and, of course, the live tours, which have a song or two to talk about for sure. Next week, Feelings, which was a demo that was leaked or hit the bootleg circuit well before the News of the World Deluxe stuff. However, a different version was released on the 2017 box set, so we got at least 2 versions of the demo to listen to. Real rockin' track there. Of course, we got Silver Salmon coming up and the live tour before we jump into the jazz album. That's next week. So I hope you stick around till next week. I hope you enjoy this week. This is a burgeoning channel. We have this channel and my main PLD Projects channel. This is the music side of things. PLD Projects is more of the TV and movie version. If you're listening on the audio feed currently, this is all in one feed, although that might be changing soon after talking with Brad Gilmore of Gilmore Media. which the PLD Projects Network is under the banner of. I may be breaking out everything into separate feeds. So Crown Jewels might be getting its own feed. It'd be something I'd branch out slowly. I'd probably put the old episodes on there first. And when I catch up, I would break this off of this channel and move it on to the other feed. I will let you guys know so you'll know what to subscribe to. I'll know it's not created yet. So no worries yet, but I'll definitely give you enough notice if you want to jump over and subscribe to that version. This will end up being just the movie and TV feed eventually. I'll be 2 Minute or Wait Dude feed, I believe, which is a podcast I do with PJ Campbell about horror franchises, if you're into that stuff. But anyway, if you're on the YouTube channel, like it, subscribe. Go hit that like and subscribe. Subscribe on the other channel as well, trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers on each. And if you want to help out the channel even further, patreon.com/PLD Projects. Have a great crew over there. Of course, we got people like Austin Goodell, Brendan Buckingham, Jeff Alterman, a bunch of others. Really couldn't do it without you guys. I really appreciate you guys keeping the lights on here, helping the show keep going. And if you can't join up there for the extra content and hangouts and Facebook chats and things like that, I get it. I totally get it. But you can still help out the channel by sharing stuff, all that good stuff. That's what you can do to help out if you want to. I really would appreciate that. We're aiming towards, again, like I said, 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and let's get the stuff out there. Let's get people involved in the community. I really appreciate you guys. All right, that'll do it for this week. Again, like I said, we'll see you next week for feelings. Until next time, we will always rock you, whether it's slow or fast. Bye now.